these are the solutions to your geometry review sheet. Be sure that you're using a grading pen to fill in the steps to any problems that you might have missed. And of course, the sound should be on. For this first one, I want you to just take a look at each of the formulas and make sure that you have them. For circumference, you should have both formulas. And then the surface area of any prism, that formula says that you're multiplying the perimeter of the prism by the height of the prism. That's going to give you the lateral surface area. And then 2b is just each base area. There'd be 2 of them, and so when you add all of those sides together, that would be this total surface area. And then the rest of these are all ones that you should be pretty familiar with by this point. All right, making sure that you can use a protractor and a ruler. You're going to start with a side length that is 4 inches long. So we can measure out 4 inches. It would really help out if you could label each of those side lengths. So this side is 4 inches. And then we're going to pick one of the 2 sides to do the 30-degree angle. We'll line this up on one of the endpoints, count up to 30, and then you can just do a straight line connecting those. And then we can move the protractor to the other side. Let's also label 30 degrees inside that vertex. And then going the other direction, we're going to measure a 50-degree angle, straight line connecting those, and then we'll put 50 degrees in that vertex just like that. Okay. Obviously, my triangle is going to be a different size, but the 30-degree, the 50-degree, and the other one would be a 110. Those are all going to be the exact same angle measures, so you could actually hold your paper up to the screen and make sure that those angles match. All right, next is the triangle inequality theorem. Remember that these are your rules that you're going off of. So for part A, since 2 plus 2 is equal to 4, that would be no. For part B, small plus the medium, that's greater than the largest side, so that would be a yes. And then when I add up the small plus the medium, that's also greater than the largest, so that would also be a yes. All right, next we have some cylindrical mud pies. It gives us the dimensions. What I'm going to do is start with formula for a cylinder, so that would be pi r squared times height. And then we can plug in everything that we have. There are 5 pails of mud, so I'm going to take all of that, multiply it by 5, and then we can substitute 6 in place of radius, 8 in place of height, and 3.14 in place of pi. And then we still have 5 of those total. So I'm going to start by doing 36 times 8, so that would be 288. Then when I do 288 times pi, that would be 904 and 32 hundredths. That's the volume of one of the cylinders. And then all 5 together gives you a total volume of 4,521 and 6/10 inches cubed. All right, next we have 2 spheres. So I'll be using 4/3 pi r cubed for each of these. And the first one has a radius of 1. So 4/3 pi times 1 cubed. 1 cubed is just 1, so this has a volume of 4/3 pi. Since I'm just trying to compare these two things, it's fine to leave it in pi. If it actually asked me for the volume, that's where I'd want to multiply it out to get my answer. The other one has a radius of 4, so times 4 cubed. and 4 cubed would be 64. So I'm just trying to figure out how many times bigger this one is compared to this one. You could, if you wanted, set up an equation, 4/3 pi times some value equals 4/3 pi times 64, and divide both sides by 4/3 pi. 4/3 divided by 4/3 is 1. Pi divided by pi is 1. So we get x is 64, which means the bigger one is 64 times larger than the smaller. All right, next is just an area of a circle. If the diameter is 8 feet, then the radius would be 4 feet. So we'll do A equals pi r squared. We're practicing our 4 steps. Area is 3.14 times 4 squared. When you do 16 times 3.14, you're going to get 50.24. And then step 4 is feet squared for area. All right, next one, you saw this on the quiz. We've got it in words. I'm also going to show what it looks like in symbols. So the length of the rectangle is going to be pi times radius, because that represents half of the circumference. Remember, the full circumference, and I do want you to include this with your answer, full circumference is 2 times pi times r. So if we do half of that, then circumference divided by 2, or 1/2 circumference, is equal to pi times radius. So we're literally just doing half of the circle all the way around is going to be this pi r value. And you can even trace your 4 pieces here and see that it matches your 4 pieces around the circle. All right, this one we're comparing 2 values, so it would be reasonable to leave it in terms of pi if you would like to. Let's start with the ice cream. So I'm going to do the sphere. Formula is 4/3 pi r cubed for the volume. And the radius is 4, so times 4 cubed. That's going to come out to 4/3 pi times 64. And I'm going to pause there just for a moment to see what happens with the cone and decide if I need to work that out any further. So cone formula for volume is pi times radius squared times height, all divided by 3 for the cone piece. Okay, so that would turn into pi times 4 squared times 9, all divided by 3. And what I'm going to do is actually split apart the 4 squared. Instead of just jumping to make that 16, I'm going to do 4 times pi times 4 times 9. Again, I'm just splitting it apart. And now I can actually take out or compare the values that are getting multiplied by the 4/3 pi. So over here, this would be a factor of 64 for the sphere. For the cone, it would be a factor of 36. So 4 pi times 36, all divided by 3. And this isn't the only way to work it out, but it makes it pretty quick to just be able to compare the numbers 64 and 36. And that shows you that the sphere is larger than the cone. It does ask us on the test to actually find the real volume. Because you're comparing, you could leave it in terms of pi if you wanted, but in that case, you would actually go ahead and multiply it out. All right, and you can see when I multiply each of those out, volume for the ice cream is 267.9 centimeters cubed. The cone only has a volume of 150.72 centimeters cubed, and so again, the ice cream would overflow the cone. Okay, so next up we've got some flowers that are supported by some wires. I'm going to emphasize that each flower has 2 wires, and then you have a total of 4 sunflowers. So let's just start with figuring out how much wire is used on each sunflower. It's 12 inches above the ground, and it's 16 inches from the base. All right, let's start Pythagorean Theorem. A squared plus b squared equals c squared. So we could do 12 squared plus 16 squared. And then 12 squared would be 144. 16 squared would be 256. And together that would be 200. Now on this one, we don't have an exact whole number square root of 200, but we can estimate a little bit. So if you go back to your chart that you have on squares, I can start by looking at the one closest. So 14 squared is 196, and 15 squared is 225. And again, I chose those because 200 is between 196 and 225. It's a little bit closer to 14. Since we can't use a calculator on the test, we would just have to estimate and say that it's a little bit bigger than 14. So 14.1 would probably be a reasonable amount to use for that. That's going to be all right, and I just realized that was actually a mistake because 14 is smaller than 16. So I went back and looked at it. I should have come up with 400, which actually makes this quite a bit easier. The square root of 400 would just be 20. So sorry for that short little detour, but each of the wires would be 20 inches. So there's 2 wires per sunflower. So for each sunflower, you would have 40 inches. And then there are a total of 4 sunflowers, so 160 inches of wire for all those flowers. All right, moving on to the next one. Remember that supplementary means that your values add up to 180. So complementary would be 90. Supplementary would be 180. And you can see those letters right there. Okay, so we're going to add up each of these expressions. 2x plus 40 plus x plus 20 all together needs to equal 180. So combine like terms. 2x plus 1x is 3x. 40 plus 20 is 60. Subtract 60 from both sides and get 3x equals 120. That would give each x a value of 40. Okay, now that we know x is 40, we can go ahead and substitute those back in. So angle A is 2 times 40 plus 40. 2 times 40 is 80, and 80 plus 40 is 120. Then we can substitute for angle B. Angle B is x plus 20, and 40 plus 20, oh, getting ahead of myself, 40 plus 20 is 60. Okay, last test, we should be able to see that those are supplementary. 120 plus 60 is in fact 180, so I know I've got the right values. Be sure that you have your degree symbols on each of those. All right, exterior angle. It says that we have an isosceles triangle. The vertex angle is 50 degrees, so since all three angles together have to add up to 180, the two base angles need to add up to 130. So each of those would be 65 degrees. And then you could either do 180 minus 65 and use the supplementary relationship, or you could use the exterior angle theorem, which says x is equal to the two other angles added up together. So 50 plus 65 is 115 degrees. And again, 115 plus 65 would get us back to the 180. Okay, angle 3 right here is supplementary to the angle that's labeled. So we could just do 180 minus 148, which would give us a measure of 32 degrees. And then using our correct vocabulary, we could say angle 3 is supplementary to angle that is labeled 148 degrees. So something about those two angles being supplementary. All right, angle 6 is, it's actually alternate interior from angle 3, and those are going to be congruent. So angle 6 would also be 32 degrees, and I could say that that is alternate interior to the one that we just found to angle 3. All right, and angle 7, if I go off of the one that I just did, I could say angle 7 is vertical to angle 6, and those are also going to be congruent. And the reason is that because it is vertical to angle 6. So I'm just going off of each one that came before to fill in all the vocab. Basically, every single acute angle is going to be 132. Every single obtuse angle will be 148 degrees. All right, next one is kind of just a guess and check. We know that the two shorter sides, when you square those, they're going to equal the hypotenuse squared. So we're looking for the two numbers that when you square them, gives a value of 1600. Okay, so when you do 18 squared plus 24 squared, you'll get 900. 14 squared plus 48 squared is 2500. 24 squared plus 32 squared is 1600, which is what we want. And then the last one, 16 squared plus 30 squared is 1156. So C would be the correct value. All right, last few, we're just setting up the formula and working backwards from that. So surface area formula would be 2 times length times width plus 2 times width times height plus 2 times height times length. And then we can substitute in everything they told us. Surface area is 148. Length is 5. Width is 4. We'll leave h the way that it is. And length again is 5. Okay, 2 times 5 times 4 is 40. 2 times 4 would make this 8h, 10h, and that's all equal to 148. So we can go ahead and combine 8h plus 10h. And then subtract 40 from each side. And finally, divide by 18. So that's going to give a height of 6 inches. All right, next one is volume of a rectangular prism. So remember, volume formula is area of the base times the height of the prism. And for a rectangular prism, area of the base would just be length times width. So I'll replace length times width for area of the base. It tells us the volume is 960 centimeters cubed. Length is what we don't know, so I'm going to leave that as L. Width is 8, and height is 12. So we can multiply 12 by 8. That'll give us 96. And then divide both sides by 96 to get 10 as the length. And then units for that will be centimeters. All right, number 15, area of a circle is pi times radius squared. So we're going to do 3.14 times radius squared, and the only thing that we can substitute in is 254.34. So divide both sides by 3.14. That will give you a value of 81. So 81 is equal to r squared, and just like with the Pythagorean theorem, you can do square root on both sides to find that the radius is 9 meters. And last one is circumference. Because they're asking about radius, I'm going to use the circumference formula that includes radius. We'll substitute in all the things we know. So circumference, 2 times 3.14 times r. 3.14 times 2 is 6.28, so we can divide, and then that'll give us 9 miles for the radius. All right, good luck preparing for your upcoming test.